6 weeks ago, on a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning, my life began to unravel in the quietest, most ordinary way imaginable. There were no dramatic confrontations, no screaming, no shattered plates, just the soft ringing of a phone at 7:30 a.m. while I was standing in the kitchen trying to convince my 2 children to finish their breakfast. At the time, I had no idea that answering that call would eventually lead to the collapse of my 11-year marriage. My name is Laura Barton, and until that morning, I believed I had a good life. A stable life, the kind of life people assume is safe. My husband, Daniel Barton, worked for a marketing firm that often sent him on short business trips. Meanwhile, I worked from home as a freelance financial consultant while taking care of our 2 children. Our son Ethan, 7 years old, was currently negotiating with his sister about who had stolen the last blueberry muffin. Our daughter Sophie, 6, insisted she was innocent, while crumbs betrayed her from the corners of her mouth. Typical morning chaos. The phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID, unknown number, which was strange. Daniel and I had spoken just the night before while he was away for a 2-day conference in Denton. Curious, I picked up. Hello? There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice came through the receiver. Laura, thank God you answered. Something about his tone made my stomach tighten immediately. What happened? He exhaled sharply. My wallet was stolen last night. I froze. What? I went down to the hotel lobby to grab a newspaper, he explained quickly. I must have left my wallet on the counter while I looked at the magazines. When I came back, it was gone. My mind immediately started running through practical concerns. Your credit cards? In the wallet. Your driver's license? Also gone. His voice sounded frustrated, embarrassed. I already told my boss, Karen. She's arranging for replacement company cards to be sent overnight before my flight tomorrow. But you need to cancel our personal credit cards immediately. I grabbed a pen automatically. Okay, I'll do that right now. I'm really sorry, he said quietly. There was about $1,200 in cash in there. That's not important, I replied. We'll deal with it. The kids were now arguing about socks behind me, completely unaware that anything unusual was happening. Daniel continued explaining. The hotel staff are checking the dumpsters nearby. Maybe someone tossed the wallet after taking the cash. I tried to stay calm. You're usually careful with your things, I said gently. I know, he admitted. I was distracted. We spoke for another minute about practical things. Flights, meetings, the kids. Then the call ended. And at that moment, I believed it was nothing more than an unfortunate inconvenience. Just a stolen wallet, a small bump in the routine of a normal family. But what I didn't know yet was that the stolen wallet wasn't the real problem. The real problem was something else entirely. Something hidden. Something I would only discover weeks later. When a $3,000 withdrawal from my husband's private investment account led me to a small jewelry store in town. And a simple phone call to that store would make me realize something terrifying. Because according to the saleswoman on the other end of the line, my husband hadn't just lost his wallet that night. He had claimed that his wedding ring was gone too, which raised a question that wouldn't leave my mind. Why would a married man take off his wedding ring during a business trip? And more importantly, why had he lied to me about it? That was the moment I began to understand something painful. The life I thought I was living might never have existed at all. If you had asked me before all of this happened whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation. Yes, not carefully, not cautiously, not the way wounded people answer when they have already learned that love can shift beneath their feet. I would have said yes with the full, unguarded certainty of a woman who believed she had built her life on something solid. I was 38 years old then. I worked from home as a freelance financial consultant, which meant my days were filled with spreadsheets, insurance renewals, household planning, client calls, and the 1,000 invisible details that keep a family from falling apart. I was organized by nature, practical by habit, and emotionally the kind of woman who preferred stability over drama. I liked routines. I liked knowing where my children's shoes were, when the bills were due, what needed to be packed for school on Friday, and which drawer Daniel left his cufflinks in when he was rushing for a trip. Daniel used to joke that I ran our home like an airport tower. "Nothing lands or takes off without Laura's permission," he would say, with that charming half smile that made everyone forgive him for teasing. And for years I laughed along, because in some ways it was true. But what he never fully understood was that I didn't manage everything because I wanted control. I did it because I believed that love was something you protected through care, through reliability, through showing up. Daniel and I met when I was 25 and he was 27. It was at a mutual friend's summer barbecue, one of those ordinary suburban gatherings where people stand around paper plates, pretending not to care that the burgers are burned. I remember him standing near the drinks table in a pale blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, laughing with someone about how he had gotten lost on the way there, even though he'd been given directions twice. There was nothing flashy about him. That was what drew me in. He didn't act like a man trying to impress a room. He was easy to talk to, attentive without being intense, warm without being intrusive. When he asked me questions, he listened to the answers. That alone felt rare. At one point, he noticed I had been balancing a plate, a glass, and my handbag all at once, and he took the drink from my hand without ceremony. "You look like you need a second pair of arms," he said. I smiled. "I usually manage." "I can tell," he replied, "but you don't always have to." That line stayed with me longer than it should have, because at that point in my life, I was used to being the dependable one, the woman who handled things, the woman who anticipated problems before anyone else noticed them. Daniel made me feel, at least in those early days, that I could soften a little around him. Our relationship moved steadily, not recklessly. We dated for nearly 3 years before he proposed. He was the one who chose the ring, and he did it in a way that reflected who we were. Nothing absurdly expensive, nothing dramatic, just elegant and thoughtful. He proposed in our apartment one rainy evening after making dinner badly and insisting it was rustic rather than undercooked. I laughed so hard I cried. Then he got down on one knee in the middle of that tiny kitchen and asked me to marry him. And I said yes before he had even finished the question. We built our marriage the way many couples do, one practical decision at a time. A modest wedding, a starter home, long work weeks, plans postponed, then reshaped, then children. Then the bigger house in the suburbs with 4 bedrooms and a pool we used far less than we had imagined when we first bought it. From the outside, we looked like a family that had figured things out, and for a long time, I believed we had. Daniel was a good father. That is one of the hardest truths in this story, because it would be easier if he had been careless in every area of life. But he wasn't. He could be patient with Ethan when homework turned into a battlefield. He could braid Sophie's doll's hair with surprising concentration. He knew how to tuck blankets around sleeping children with that quiet tenderness some men only show when they think no one is watching. He loved them. I do believe that. And I believe they loved him with the total trust children give before they understand that adults can split themselves into different versions depending on who is looking, because that was the part I missed for years. Daniel was not one man. He was several. There was the husband who kissed my forehead in the morning while I packed lunches, the father who lay on the floor building block towers with the kids, the professional who wore crisp shirts and traveled once a month for work, always complaining mildly about airport coffee and hotel beds. And then, though I did not know it yet, there was another version of him, a version that existed in hotel elevators, restaurant booths, and anonymous evenings far from home. But before suspicion, there were only small things. Small things are dangerous because they never look worthy of alarm when they happen. Daniel's business travel increased gradually over the years, never enough to provoke a fight. 2 nights here, 3 nights there, a conference, a client dinner, a regional training session. His explanations always made sense individually. Even together, they did not quite form a pattern I was prepared to call suspicious. He was never foolish enough to come home smelling of perfume or carrying obvious traces of betrayal. It was subtler than that. Sometimes he returned strangely energized from a trip, as though the days away had restored something in him that home life depleted. Sometimes he returned distant instead, affectionate in a careful way, almost like a man imitating himself. There were evenings when I would ask, "How was the conference?" And he would answer too vaguely, "Long, busy, the usual." At the time, I told myself that was normal. People get tired. Travel is tedious. Not every husband returns home eager to recount panel discussions and hotel breakfasts. Still, there were moments that lingered. A new shirt he bought in another city that he seemed oddly pleased with. A sudden interest in better cologne. The way he began going to the gym more consistently before certain trips. The way he sometimes checked his reflection in the hallway mirror with just a second too much attention. Not vanity, exactly. Preparation. But I did not have that word for it then. I also ignored another truth. I had become so immersed in the machinery of our family that I stopped asking whether I was still being fully seen inside my marriage. I was efficient, dependable, loving, available. I held the household together with invisible labor. Daniel appreciated me, at least he said he did. But appreciation is not the same as intimacy, and routine is not the same as honesty. When his travel became part of our normal life, I adapted the way wives often do. I packed around his schedule. I adjusted dinner plans. I explained to the children why Daddy would miss Thursday bedtime, but would be home by Friday afternoon. Sophie used to ask, "Does Daddy sleep in a giant fancy hotel every time?" And Daniel would grin, "Not giant, just boring." Ethan once said, "Can I go on your work trip someday?" Daniel laughed and ruffled his hair. "When you're older, buddy. Right now, it's just meetings and boring adult stuff." That was always the story. Boring adult stuff. Nothing glamorous. Nothing worth questioning. And because I wanted peace more than suspicion, I accepted that story over and over again. Our relationship with Daniel's side of the family was civil, though never deeply intimate. His brother Michael lived in another state and called mostly on holidays. His wider circle of friends knew me, liked me, and treated me as Daniel's steady, competent wife, the woman who remembered birthdays, coordinated barbecues, and always brought something homemade, even when takeout would have been easier. No one ever hinted that there was a problem. No one gave me the kind of warning women in movies always seem to get. There was no mysterious friend pulling me aside, no dramatic message, no lipstick on a collar, just a life that looked normal enough to keep me from asking harder questions. And maybe that was why the truth hit so hard later, because betrayal is not only about what the other person did, it is also about the life you built around a false understanding. When I look back now, I can see the quiet imbalance that had grown inside our marriage. Daniel moved through the world with more freedom than I did. His work took him outward. Mine kept me rooted. He had hotel lobbies, dinners, strangers, reinvention. I had school pickups, deadlines, grocery lists, and the sacred repetition of home. I never resented that, but I think he began to. Or perhaps he began to take it for granted. Either way, by the time that phone call came on that Thursday morning, the foundation of our marriage had already started cracking. I just hadn't heard the sound yet. At that moment, I was still the woman who believed her husband had simply lost a wallet. Still the woman who reassured him gently. Still the woman who canceled the cards, comforted the children, answered emails, and moved through the day as if everything in my life remained exactly where I had left it. I didn't know that one lie had already been spoken. And once a lie enters a marriage quietly enough, it can sit at the table for a very long time before anyone notices it belongs there. For the next several weeks after Daniel's phone call about the stolen wallet, life returned to what looked like normal, at least on the surface. The credit cards were canceled without any unauthorized charges. Replacement cards arrived within a few days. Daniel finished his work trip and came home on Friday evening, just as he promised. He hugged the kids, complained about airport delays, and brought Sophie a small stuffed rabbit from the gift shop. Everything about his return looked ordinary, too ordinary. If I'm being honest now, the strange feeling didn't start as suspicion. It started as restlessness, a quiet voice in the back of my mind that kept replaying the details of that phone call. The stolen wallet, the $1,200 in cash, the missing driver's license. At first, I tried to dismiss the feeling. People lose things. Wallets get stolen in hotels all the time. The world is messy and unpredictable. But something about Daniel's explanation kept tugging at my thoughts in small, irritating ways. He had told me he left the wallet at the hotel cashier counter while looking at magazines. But when I later asked him casually about the hotel lobby, he described the place differently. There was a dance event going on downstairs, he said one evening while scrolling through emails. The lobby was crowded. I looked up from the kitchen counter. A dance event? Yeah, he said, some corporate thing. The comment passed quickly, but it planted something inside me because a crowded dance event and a quiet cashier counter were two very different settings. Still, I didn't push. Marriage teaches you that not every inconsistency deserves a confrontation. Or maybe I simply wasn't ready to question the man I had trusted for more than a decade. So the days continued. School mornings, client calls, laundry piles, weekend soccer games. Daniel traveled again the following month for another 2-night work trip. That had become routine for our family. The children barely reacted anymore when he packed his suitcase. "Daddy's going on another meeting trip," Ethan announced one night at dinner. Daniel smiled. "Just a quick one," Sophie pouted. "You always say that." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'll bring you something better than a stuffed rabbit this time." The moment looked so sincere that I almost felt guilty for remembering the strange tension that had been building quietly in my mind. For a while, I convinced myself everything was fine, until the afternoon I accidentally discovered the statement. It happened about 6 weeks after the stolen wallet incident. I had been searching through the filing cabinet in Daniel's office looking for our home insurance policy. Renewal season was approaching, and I wanted to compare quotes before signing anything. The folder I needed wasn't there. But another folder caught my attention. Daniel kept a separate investment account at Fidelity, a fund created from the inheritance he received after his parents died in a car accident several years earlier. The inheritance had been around $350,000. Daniel handled that account himself. I respected his privacy about it the same way he respected my professional accounts. We had always believed in giving each other financial independence alongside our shared finances. So normally, I would have ignored the folder completely. But when it slipped off the shelf while I was pulling another file, several statements slid onto the floor. I bent down to pick them up, and before I could stop myself, my eyes scanned the numbers. The balance had grown quite a bit, just over $400,000 now. I smiled faintly. Daniel had always been careful with investments. Seeing that growth made me feel proud of him. But then something else caught my eye. A withdrawal. $3,000. The date was interesting. 6 weeks earlier, the same week his wallet had supposedly been stolen. My curiosity sharpened instantly. $3,000 wasn't catastrophic money for us, but it wasn't small either. Daniel wasn't the kind of person who casually withdrew that amount without mentioning it. I sat down at the desk and examined the statement more closely. The withdrawal had been transferred from the money market portion of the account. Then, 2 days later, there was a note attached to the transaction. A check payment, payable to a local jewelry store. I stared at the name of the store for a long moment. Jewelry. That immediately made my mind race through possibilities. Had Daniel bought something for me? Our anniversary wasn't close. My birthday had already passed. Maybe it was a gift for someone else in the family? But $3,000 for his brother Michael seemed unlikely. And Daniel hadn't mentioned buying jewelry for anyone. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe he had purchased a watch. Maybe it was a business gift. Maybe I was overthinking something completely innocent. Still, curiosity can be a dangerous thing when it mixes with unease. The more I stared at the statement, the harder it became to ignore the question forming in my mind. What exactly had he bought? I opened my laptop and typed the jewelry store's name into the search bar. The website appeared immediately. A small boutique downtown. Elegant but not extravagant. Engagement rings. Wedding bands. Anniversary jewelry. My heart beat a little faster as I looked through the images. The store phone number was listed clearly on the contact page. I hesitated. Calling would mean crossing a line. Up until that moment, Everything I knew was circumstantial, but once I asked questions, I might discover something I couldn't unlearn. I sat there for almost 5 minutes, staring at the number. Then I picked up the phone. The line rang twice before a cheerful female voice answered. "Good afternoon, Harper Jewelers. How may I help you?" For a moment, I almost hung up. But instead, I said calmly, "Hello, my name is Laura Barton. I'm calling about a purchase that may have been made recently under my husband's name." There was a pause as she typed something into her computer. "Yes, Mrs. Barton. What seems to be the problem?" I improvised quickly. "We're having a small issue with the item and wanted to ask about the warranty." Another pause. More typing. Then she said something that made my stomach drop instantly. "Oh yes, I remember that purchase." My grip tightened around the phone. "You do?" "Yes," she continued casually. "Your husband came in a few weeks ago. He said his wedding and engagement rings had been stolen, and he needed replacements that looked very similar to the originals. The room—" I swallowed. "Yes," the woman said kindly. "He seemed very upset about losing them." My mind froze, because he only said his wallet had been stolen, not his rings, not the symbols of our entire marriage. "I see," I said slowly. "We tried to match the original design as closely as possible," she continued. "Your husband used a company credit card temporarily as collateral and then mailed us a check to complete the payment." My heart was now pounding loudly in my chest. "Thank you," I said carefully. "I'll need to discuss something with my husband before we make any decisions." "Of course," she replied politely. "If there's any issue with the setting, we offer a 90-day warranty." "Thank you." I ended the call. Then I sat in complete silence, because suddenly a terrible possibility began forming in my mind. If Daniel had lost his wedding ring, why would he have taken it off in the first place? And the only answer that made sense was one I desperately hoped was wrong. For the rest of that afternoon, I moved through the house like someone walking through fog. My hands kept working, loading the dishwasher, folding laundry, answering 2 emails from clients. But my mind stayed trapped inside the same question over and over again. Why would Daniel remove his wedding ring during a work trip? There were only a few possible explanations. None of them were good. I tried desperately to construct innocent scenarios. Maybe the ring had been uncomfortable. Maybe he removed it temporarily while washing his hands. Maybe the hotel gym required people to remove jewelry. But those explanations collapsed almost immediately under their own weight. Because if the ring had been lost accidentally, Daniel would have told me. There would have been no reason to hide it. And yet he hadn't mentioned it at all. Not during the phone call, not when he came home, not in the 6 weeks since. Instead, he had quietly replaced the rings and pretended nothing had happened. That realization sat inside my chest like a stone. Still, even then, I didn't have proof of anything, just suspicion. Just a quiet fear growing inside me. And fear, if left alone long enough, starts searching for confirmation. The next morning, while the kids were at school, I made another phone call, this time to the hotel where Daniel had stayed during that trip. I introduced myself politely. "Hello, I'm Laura Barton. My husband Daniel reported a stolen wallet during his stay there about 6 weeks ago. I was wondering if you might have a record of the incident." There was a short pause. Then the receptionist answered. "Yes, Mrs. Barton, there is a written report." My heart skipped. Would it be possible to receive a copy? After confirming my email address, she agreed to send it. 10 minutes later, the document arrived. I opened it slowly, and as I read the statement, the knot in my stomach tightened, because the story in the report didn't match what Daniel had told me. Not even close. According to the written statement Daniel himself had signed, his wallet had not disappeared from a quiet cashier counter. It had disappeared while he was dancing in the hotel ballroom. He had left his wallet at a booth table while he was on the dance floor. When he returned, it was gone. I stared at the screen for a long time. Dancing. That meant music. Alcohol. A crowded room. People moving close together. And suddenly, the missing ring made much more sense. A married man dancing with strangers in a ballroom might very well remove his wedding ring, so he could appear single. The thought made my stomach twist painfully. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my fingers against my temples. Maybe it was just harmless dancing. Maybe he had simply enjoyed the event. But another detail in the report made the situation worse. Daniel had written that he did not wish to involve the police. That was strange. If someone had stolen $1,200, multiple credit cards, and a driver's license, most people would file a police report immediately. Instead, he had declined. Why? Because filing a report would have required answering more questions. Questions about what he had been doing, who he had been with, where exactly the wallet disappeared. The more I thought about it, the clearer the picture became. The missing wallet. The hidden rings. The quiet replacement purchase. The altered story. Piece by piece, the situation began assembling itself into something ugly. But there was still no direct proof. No photographs. No names. No confirmation that Daniel had actually crossed the line. Just the terrifying possibility that he might have. And once that possibility enters your mind, it changes the way you see everything. That evening, while I cooked dinner, Daniel returned home from work looking unusually cheerful. He kissed me on the cheek. "Something smells good." "Just chili," I said. Ethan was building a tower out of plastic blocks in the living room, while Sophie was coloring pictures on the floor. Daniel loosened his tie and sat at the table. "Long day," he said. I watched him carefully. The same man I had been married to for 11 years. The same warm smile. The same easy voice. But now every movement felt different because doubt had entered the room. "So," I said casually, "another trip coming up soon?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, in a couple of days." "Where to this time?" "Denton again," he replied. My heart skipped slightly. The same city. The same place where his wallet, and apparently his wedding ring, had disappeared. "You'll be leaving early?" I asked. 7:30 flight. He scooped a spoonful of chili and blew on it. "Just 2 nights." I forced myself to sound relaxed. "You travel so much lately," he shrugged. "Part of the job." I hesitated before asking my next question. "If you don't enjoy it, why not apply for a desk position?" Daniel looked at me for a moment. "I might eventually," he said, "but I want a little more field experience first." Then he smiled gently. "I know it's hard on you when I'm gone." I nodded. "And the kids miss you too." His expression softened. "I miss all of you." For a brief moment, the sincerity in his voice almost made me question my own doubts. Maybe I was imagining everything. Maybe the missing rings had been an innocent mistake. But then Daniel added something that made my stomach tighten again. "I'll bring my briefcase home tomorrow night so I can pack before the flight." The words were simple, but my mind reacted instantly because I suddenly realized something important. Daniel's briefcase always contained his work materials when he traveled. Documents, laptop, presentation notes. But if he had been seeing other women during his trips, then that briefcase might also carry something else, something he wouldn't want me to find. The thought appeared suddenly, and once it formed, it refused to disappear. Because if Daniel had been meeting other women while traveling, he would need protection. Contraceptives. And if he kept them anywhere, the briefcase was the most likely place. The idea horrified me, but it also gave me a chance to finally know the truth. For the rest of dinner, I kept my voice calm. I laughed when the kids told stories. I kissed Daniel goodnight. I behaved exactly like the same wife I had always been. But inside my mind, a decision had already been made. When Daniel brought his briefcase home the next evening, I was going to look inside it. And whatever I found there would tell me whether my marriage was still real, or whether it had already ended long before I realized it. The next evening arrived faster than I expected. All day long, while answering client emails and helping Sophie practice reading, my mind kept drifting back to the same thought. The briefcase. If there was anything hidden in Daniel's life, that briefcase might reveal it. But I also knew something else. Once I opened it, there would be no going back. Because suspicion can still be ignored. Evidence cannot. By the time Daniel's car pulled into the driveway around 6 o'clock, my nerves were stretched tight. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and forced myself to breathe normally. The garage door opened. A moment later, he walked inside, looking unusually upbeat. "Hey," he said, smiling. "Hi." He kissed my cheek the way he always did when he came home. For a moment, the familiar warmth of that gesture made my chest ache. 11 years of marriage lived inside that small, automatic kiss. And yet, at that moment, I wasn't sure if it meant anything anymore. Daniel hung his jacket on the hallway hook and loosened his tie. "Dinner smells great." "I made pasta tonight," I said. The kids came running down the hallway. "Daddy!" Daniel crouched down immediately, hugging both of them. "How are my favorite troublemakers?" "Dad, you promised me a drone," Ethan announced dramatically. Daniel laughed. "Did I? That sounds expensive." Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "You said you'd bring me something from your trip." "I haven't gone yet," he teased. For a moment, everything looked like the normal, happy family life I had believed in for so many years. And part of me desperately wanted to believe it still was. During dinner, Daniel seemed relaxed, maybe even excited. "So you're leaving tomorrow morning?" I asked casually. "Yeah, 7:30 flight. 2 nights again. Just until Friday." He wiped his mouth with a napkin. "I'll bring my briefcase home tonight so I can pack everything." My pulse quickened slightly. "Oh?" "Yeah," he said. "It's already in the car." Exactly what I had hoped, and exactly what I feared. Dinner ended with the usual chaos of clearing plates and loading the dishwasher. Daniel helped rinse the dishes, while Sophie talked endlessly about something that had happened at school. Everything felt painfully normal, but inside my mind, a quiet plan was forming. When Daniel finished in the kitchen, he stretched. "I'm going to pack a few things for tomorrow. I'll grab your suitcase from the garage," I said quickly. "Thanks." He disappeared down the hallway toward the bedroom. I walked out to the garage slowly, trying to control the trembling in my hands. Daniel's car sat quietly under the dim overhead light. I opened the trunk. There it was. The briefcase, dark leather, perfectly ordinary. For a moment, I just stared at it. If I closed the trunk now, nothing would change. My life would remain exactly the same as it had been yesterday. But if I opened it, I might destroy everything. I swallowed hard. Then I lifted it out of the trunk. A few minutes later, I walked back inside carrying the suitcase Daniel had asked for. "Found it," I said casually as I placed it near the bedroom door. "Thanks, honey," Daniel replied from inside the room. "I'm going to check the tire pressure," I added quickly. "One of them looks a little low." He nodded distractedly while folding shirts. "Okay." My heart pounded as I walked back to the garage with the briefcase. Instead, 5 minutes later, I pulled into the small service station owned by my old school friend, Jerry Collins. Jerry stepped out of the garage bay, wiping grease from his hands. "Well, Laura," he said with a grin, "didn't expect to see you tonight." He glanced at the car. "Tire trouble?" "Something like that." I pulled into the service bay. Jerry closed the door behind the car. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. "I just need a few minutes." He nodded slowly. "Take your time." Jerry walked back toward the office, leaving me alone in the garage. My hands were shaking as I opened the trunk. I lifted the briefcase and placed it on the workbench. For a few seconds, I just stared at the lock. Then I remembered something. Daniel always used the same simple combination. Our wedding anniversary. My fingers turned the numbers slowly. Click. The lock opened. My heart began pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. Inside were the things I expected. Laptop, folders, presentation notes, pens. Completely normal. For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe this entire nightmare existed only in my imagination. But then my hand brushed against a small pocket inside the lid. Something soft was tucked inside. I hesitated. Then I pulled it out. My breath stopped. It was a small, opened box. A box of condoms. 3 were missing. The garage felt suddenly silent and heavy. I stared at the package for what felt like several minutes. Every terrible suspicion I had tried to suppress was now staring back at me in undeniable proof. Daniel wasn't just removing his wedding ring. He wasn't just flirting at hotel events. He was sleeping with other women, and he had planned it carefully enough to carry protection with him. My hands moved automatically as I placed the box back exactly where I had found it. Closed the briefcase, locked it, returned it to the trunk. But inside me, something had changed permanently. When Jerry returned a few minutes later, I was sitting in the driver's seat staring at nothing. "You find what you were looking for?" he asked gently. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Bad news? I forced a small smile. Something like that. Jerry didn't push. He simply checked the tire pressure like I had asked and waved as I drove away. On the way home, my thoughts felt strangely calm, not because the pain was gone, but because the uncertainty was, I finally knew the truth. My husband was living a completely different life when he traveled, and suddenly the future I had imagined for our family no longer existed. When I drove back home that night, the sky had already darkened. The house lights were glowing warmly through the kitchen windows, and for a moment, the sight nearly broke me. Because from the outside, our life still looked perfect. Inside that house were my children, my marriage. 11 years of memories. And yet, sitting in the driver's seat with Daniel's briefcase back in the trunk, I already knew something irreversible had happened. I had crossed a line, not by opening the briefcase, but by learning the truth. Once you see betrayal clearly, you can never return to the innocence that existed before it. I pulled into the garage slowly and turned off the engine. For several seconds, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Anger was there, so was sadness. But strangely, what I felt most was clarity. Daniel had made choices. Now I would make mine. I carried the briefcase inside exactly as if nothing had happened, and set it beside his suitcase in the bedroom. Daniel looked up from the bed where he was folding shirts. All set with the tire? Yeah, I said calmly. Just a small nail. Good thing you caught it early. He smiled. The same smile I had trusted for years. I nodded and forced myself to behave normally. Dinner dishes had already been cleaned, so we spent the next half hour in the living room with the kids watching a cartoon. Ethan was sprawled on the floor, building a Lego spaceship. Sophie curled against Daniel's side under a blanket. From the outside, we looked like a family enjoying a quiet evening together. But sitting there beside Daniel, I felt as if I were watching someone else's life. My thoughts were already moving ahead. Evidence. Lawyers. Custody. If Daniel had been cheating repeatedly during his trips, I needed proof. Not for revenge. For protection, because once divorce entered the picture, the most important thing would be the children. Ethan and Sophie deserved stability, and Daniel's lifestyle during his trips raised questions I couldn't ignore. Later that night, after we put the kids to bed together, Daniel wrapped his arm around my waist as we walked back to the bedroom. You seem tired, he said softly. Just a long day. He kissed my temple. I'll be back Friday. I nodded. But inside my chest, something heavy shifted. Friday no longer meant the same thing it used to. When we went to bed, Daniel reached for me the way he always did before leaving for a trip. For years, that had been our quiet ritual, a way of reconnecting before days apart. But that night, something was different. The intimacy felt hollow, mechanical. Daniel noticed it too. Are you okay? He asked quietly. My stomach's bothering me, I replied. He frowned slightly. You've mentioned that a few times lately. Maybe you should see a doctor. I will, I said. The truth was, my stomach really did hurt, but not because of illness, because of what I knew. Later, after Daniel fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about everything carefully. Rage would solve nothing. Exploding emotionally would only give Daniel time to prepare excuses. If I wanted the truth, I needed patience and strategy. At 5 the next morning, Daniel quietly got up for his flight. I pretended to still be asleep. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. Still not feeling well? I nodded slightly without opening my eyes. Travel safe, I murmured. A few minutes later, I heard the garage door close. And just like that, he was gone. For the first time since discovering the condoms, I was alone with my thoughts. I got up, showered, and helped the kids get ready for school. I behaved exactly the same as always. Breakfast. Backpacks. School bus. Routine. But the moment the bus disappeared around the corner, I went back inside and opened the phone book. I turned slowly through the yellow pages. Private investigators. If Daniel was cheating during his trips, someone needed to document it. Photos. Times. Locations. Something undeniable. After calling several agencies, I finally found one with offices both in our town and in Denton. Perfect. I scheduled a meeting for later that morning. The office was small but professional. A middle-aged investigator named Mark Reynolds listened carefully while I explained the situation. "You believe your husband is meeting other women during business trips?" he said. "I'm certain of it." "Do you want confirmation?" "Yes." Mark nodded slowly. "We can have someone in Denton follow him tomorrow evening after his meetings finish." He explained how surveillance worked. Hotel lobbies, restaurants, parking lots, discreet photography, reports. Everything documented. The cost wasn't small, but at that moment, money didn't matter. Truth did. I handed him a photograph of Daniel from our last family vacation. "He's staying at the Denton Marriott," I said. Mark wrote down the information. "We'll start tomorrow evening." By the time I left his office, the first step had already been taken. But there was another step I needed to prepare. Divorce. That afternoon, I met with an attorney recommended by a friend. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and she specialized in family law. After listening to my story, she leaned back in her chair thoughtfully. "In this state," she explained, "divorce is technically no fault. That means infidelity isn't required to file." "I understand," I said. "But documentation can still influence custody arrangements," she added. That was the part that mattered most to me. "I'm the primary caregiver," I told her. Karen nodded. "That will carry significant weight." She explained how assets would likely be divided. The house. Savings. Daniel's inheritance would remain his. Child support would be determined by income. Everything sounded strangely calm and procedural, like dismantling a life was simply another legal process. When the meeting ended, Karen said quietly, "If you decide to proceed, we can prepare the paperwork immediately." I nodded. "Yes, please do." As I drove home that afternoon, I realized something. Just 24 hours earlier, I had still been a wife trying to understand a confusing situation. Now I was preparing for the end of my marriage, and Daniel had no idea. That night, I tucked the kids into bed and kissed their foreheads. Sophie wrapped her arms around my neck. "Mommy, when Daddy comes back Friday, can we go swimming?" "Maybe," I said gently, but inside I knew something she didn't. By the time Daniel returned from this trip, our lives would already be changing, and the truth about what he was doing in Denton was about to surface. The report arrived on Monday morning. I had barely slept the night before. Even though Daniel had returned from his trip on Friday and spent the weekend behaving exactly like the same husband I had known for years, the tension inside me had never really left. He played with the kids. He mowed the lawn. He kissed me goodnight. And all the while, the investigation was happening quietly in the background, waiting. By Monday morning, the truth was ready. The phone rang at 9:15. The number on the screen belonged to the detective agency. My chest tightened. "Hello?" "Mrs. Barton," Mark Reynolds said calmly. "We have the surveillance report ready." I swallowed. "I'll come right away." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from him in the same office where I had hired him. A thick envelope sat on the desk between us. Mark slid it toward me. "This contains the written report and several photographs taken by our Denton investigator." He hesitated slightly. "I should warn you, the images are quite clear." My hands felt cold as I opened the envelope. The first page described the beginning of the surveillance. Subject: Daniel Barton. Location: Denton Marriott Hotel. Time: 5:17 p.m. According to the report, Daniel had returned to his hotel room after his meetings that afternoon. There was a photograph attached. In the image, Daniel stood in the lobby wearing his work badge and carrying his briefcase. He looked exactly the way he always did after a business day. Professional. Ordinary. Still wearing his wedding ring. For a moment, a strange wave of relief passed through me. Maybe nothing had happened after all. But the next photograph destroyed that hope completely. At 6:31 p.m., Daniel left his room again. This time, he was wearing something different. A dark jacket. Open collar. And when I looked closer, I noticed something immediately. His left hand was bare. The wedding ring was gone. My throat tightened as I turned to the next photograph. Daniel was standing in the hotel lobby. Across from him stood a woman, young, blonde, laughing. They were standing far too close to be strangers. The next image was worse. They were sitting together in a restaurant booth. Daniel's arm wrapped loosely around her shoulders, their faces inches apart. And then the final photograph. Daniel kissing her. Not a quick, polite kiss. A long, unmistakably intimate one. I stared at the image, unable to breathe. The man in that photograph was my husband, the father of my children, the man who had kissed me goodbye that same morning. The report continued. At 8:51 p.m., Daniel and the woman left the restaurant. Another photograph showed them entering the elevator together. The next image was taken in the hallway outside his room. Daniel was unlocking the door. The woman stood beside him, smiling. At 11:13 p.m., the woman finally left the room, her hair slightly messy, her dress wrinkled. She walked down the hallway alone. The investigator had followed her to the parking lot and recorded the license plate of the car she entered. The car belonged to Michael Sanders, a local businessman. But that detail almost didn't matter, because the next page of the report revealed something even worse. The following night, Daniel repeated the exact same pattern. Dinner, drinks, another woman, another hotel room. I stopped reading. The room felt unbearably quiet. For several minutes, I just stared at the photographs scattered across the desk. Every image told the same story. Daniel removing his ring. Daniel flirting. Daniel kissing someone who was not his wife. Mark spoke carefully. "I'm sorry you had to see this." I nodded slowly, though my mind felt numb. "So it wasn't just one mistake," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "It appears to be a pattern." A pattern? The word echoed painfully in my mind. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a habit. A secret life. A version of Daniel that existed entirely outside our home. I gathered the photographs slowly and placed them back into the envelope. "How much do I owe you?" I asked. Mark told me the remaining balance. I paid it immediately. Then I asked for 2 additional copies of the report. When I finally left the office and stepped outside, the sunlight felt strangely harsh. The world looked exactly the same. Cars passing, people walking. A normal Monday morning. But inside me, something had collapsed completely. For 11 years, I had believed my marriage was built on trust. Now I knew the truth. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me once. He had built an entire double life during his business trips. And the worst part wasn't the anger. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the quiet realization that the man I had loved was someone I no longer recognized. By the time I drove home from the detective's office that Monday morning, something inside me had shifted. The shock was still there. The sadness, too. But the uncertainty that had haunted me for weeks was finally gone. I knew the truth now. And strangely, knowing the truth made the next step clearer than I expected. When I walked into the house, the silence felt heavy. Daniel had already left for work, and the kids were at school. The living room looked exactly the way we had left it that morning. Sophie's coloring pencils scattered on the coffee table, Ethan's half-finished Lego spaceship on the floor. I stood there for a moment, staring at the quiet house. For 11 years, this had been the center of my world, and now I was preparing to dismantle the life inside it. I went straight to my home office and took the envelope from my bag. The photograph slid out onto the desk again. Daniel in the restaurant booth. Daniel kissing the blonde woman. Daniel opening the hotel room door. Each image felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I stared at them for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't expected. I stopped crying. Because the moment I looked at those photographs carefully, I realized something important. Daniel hadn't looked guilty. He hadn't looked conflicted. He hadn't looked like a man making a terrible mistake. He had looked comfortable, relaxed, experienced, like someone who had done this many times before. Because it meant our marriage hadn't been destroyed by one bad decision. It had been quietly eroded by choices he made again and again. I gathered the photos, sealed them back in the envelope, and picked up the phone. "Karen, Laura?" "It's time," I said. There was a short pause. "You've decided to proceed with the divorce?" "Yes." Her voice became professional immediately. "I already prepared the paperwork. We can file today." "Do it." We reviewed the details one more time. Because I was the children's primary caregiver, the custody arrangement would most likely favor me. Daniel would receive visitation rights, but the children would live with me in the house. The house itself would remain shared property until Ethan and Sophie turned 18. After that, it would be sold and the proceeds divided. Daniel's inheritance money was not part of the marital assets, and honestly, I didn't want it. All I cared about was protecting my children's stability. There's one more thing, I told Karen. Yes? I want the papers served to him at work. There was a moment of silence. Public service can be uncomfortable, she said carefully. I know. Are you sure? I looked down at the photograph of Daniel kissing the woman in the restaurant booth. Yes, I said quietly. I'm sure. Karen made a note. All right, we can arrange that tomorrow morning. When I hung up the phone, my hands were surprisingly steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost resembled control. Daniel had spent months controlling the narrative of our marriage. Now the story was changing. That afternoon, I picked the kids up from the school bus exactly the way I always did. Ethan ran up the driveway holding a crumpled math worksheet. Mom, I got 100. That's amazing, I said, hugging him. Sophie immediately asked the question she asked almost every Monday. When is Daddy coming home today? After work, I replied gently. She nodded and ran inside. Watching them play in the living room, I felt the weight of what was coming. They didn't know yet. They couldn't know. To them, their father was still the same man who helped with homework and built Lego towers. And no matter what Daniel had done to me, he was still their father. That evening when Daniel came home, I greeted him exactly the same way I always had. Hi, I said as he walked through the door. Hey. He kissed my cheek casually. For a moment, I studied his face. The same calm expression, the same relaxed smile. No sign that his world was about to collapse. Dinner that night felt strangely peaceful. We talked about school projects, weekend plans, and Ethan's upcoming soccer game. Daniel even joked about taking everyone swimming on Saturday if the weather stayed warm. I listened quietly, because I knew something he didn't. By this time tomorrow, our marriage would officially be over. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind while I stood at the kitchen sink. You seem better tonight, he said softly. Better? You said your stomach had been bothering you. I turned toward him. I'm feeling better now. He smiled. Good. For a brief moment, he looked relieved, and I realized something strange. He still believed everything was normal. The lies, the secrets, the double life. He thought he had gotten away with all of it. That realization gave me a kind of quiet strength, because tomorrow morning, Daniel Barton was going to learn that the truth always catches up eventually. The next morning began like every other weekday in our house. Alarm clocks, cereal bowls, backpacks scattered across the kitchen chairs. If anyone had looked through our windows at that moment, they would have seen an ordinary family preparing for school and work. But beneath the routine, everything was about to change. Daniel came into the kitchen wearing a light gray shirt and adjusting his watch. Morning, he said. Morning. He poured himself coffee while Ethan and Sophie argued over whose turn it was to feed the dog. For a moment, I simply watched him. The same man who had kissed other women in hotel rooms only days earlier was now tying his son's shoelaces like nothing had happened. The contrast made my chest tighten, but I kept my voice calm. You'll be home around 6 tonight? I asked. Probably, Daniel replied. Why? No reason. He shrugged and took a sip of coffee. A few minutes later, he leaned down and kissed my cheek before heading toward the door. I love you, he said casually. The words felt strangely hollow. I hope you have a good day. You too, I replied. Then he left. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the countdown had begun. I spent the morning helping the kids get ready for school. We walked together to the bus stop the way we always did. Sophie held my hand. Mommy, can we bake cookies tonight? Maybe, I said gently. Ethan climbed onto the bus and waved through the window. Bye, Mom. Bye, sweetheart. When the bus finally disappeared down the street, I stood there for a long moment. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from my attorney. The papers have been served. I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere across town, Daniel was holding the envelope that ended our marriage. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang. The caller ID showed his office number. I answered without speaking. For a few seconds, there was only silence on the line. Then I heard his voice. It sounded completely different from the confident tone he used at breakfast. Laura. He stopped. I didn't reply. I just received something. Another long pause. I know, I said quietly. His breathing grew heavier. Is this a joke? No. Divorce papers? He whispered. Yes. Silence filled the line again. Then his voice broke. Laura, please, we need to talk. I stayed calm. There's nothing to discuss. That's not true, he said quickly. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Another pause. How long have you known? He asked quietly. I didn't answer that question. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. You should sign the documents. Laura, please, he said desperately. Don't do this. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt the full weight of what was happening. 11 years of marriage were collapsing in a single phone call. But the images from the detective's report flashed through my mind again. The restaurant, the elevator, the hotel room. Daniel, I said softly, our marriage ended before those papers arrived. He inhaled sharply. I made mistakes, he said. Mistakes. The word felt almost absurd. You made choices, I replied. There was a quiet sob on the other end of the line. I love you, he whispered. I closed my eyes. Once, hearing those words from him would have meant everything. Now they felt like echoes from a life that no longer existed. If you loved me, I said quietly, you wouldn't have needed to take off your wedding ring. The line went silent. He understood immediately. You were watching me? He asked. I know enough. Several seconds passed before he spoke again. I'm sorry. For the first time, his voice sounded genuinely broken, but something inside me had already closed. I hope you sign the papers soon, I said. Then I ended the call. The rest of the day passed slowly. When the children returned from school, they immediately noticed that Daniel wasn't home yet. Where's Dad? Ethan asked. He's working late, I said gently. Sophie looked disappointed. That evening, I took them out for dinner at McDonald's. They laughed and played with the toys in their Happy Meals, completely unaware that their family had just changed forever. By the time we returned home, they were exhausted. I tucked them into bed and kissed their foreheads. Good night, Mom, Ethan murmured sleepily. Good night, sweetheart. The house grew quiet again. Daniel didn't come home that night. And deep down, I knew he probably wouldn't. The life we had built together was already collapsing around us. And the truth, once hidden in hotel rooms and late-night lies, had finally caught up with him. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. No dramatic courtroom battles, no public arguments, just signatures, documents, and the quiet legal language that officially ended 11 years of marriage. Daniel signed the papers within a few days after receiving them. We met only once in person during that time, in my lawyer Karen Whitmore's office, to finalize the remaining details. It was the first time we had sat across from each other since the day he received the divorce papers. Daniel looked different, not physically. He was still the same man I had known for over a decade. But something in his expression had changed. The confidence was gone. The calm certainty he used to carry had been replaced by something heavier. Regret. Or maybe simply the consequences of his own choices. He tried to speak several times during that meeting. Laura, please, if we could just talk. But I shook my head gently. This isn't a conversation anymore. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't angry. It was simply final. At one point, he admitted something that explained part of what had happened. He told us he had been seeing a psychologist. The doctor had diagnosed him with what he called compulsive sexual behavior, something Daniel claimed he had struggled with privately for years. I didn't understand it before, he said quietly, but I'm getting help now. Karen remained silent beside me, letting me decide how to respond. I looked at Daniel for a long moment. Once upon a time, hearing that explanation might have softened my heart, but by then, the damage had already been done. You should have asked for help before destroying your family, I said calmly. Daniel lowered his head. I know. There was nothing more to say. After the divorce, Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. He was granted regular visitation with Ethan and Sophie, and to his credit, he never failed to show up for them. Despite everything that happened between us, he remained a good father, and I never tried to take that away from the children. They deserved to have both parents in their lives. Still, the transition was difficult. The first few months felt strange and empty. The house seemed too quiet after the kids went to sleep. There were nights when memories crept back unexpectedly. The early years of our marriage, the small moments that once felt meaningful. Healing doesn't happen instantly. It happens slowly. Day by day, piece by piece. Eventually, something inside me began to change. Not bitterness, not revenge, just acceptance. I focused on rebuilding our lives. I spent more time with the kids. We took small weekend trips. We repainted Sophie's bedroom a bright shade of lavender she had always wanted. Little by little, the house began to feel like a home again. About a year after the divorce, something else unexpected happened. I started dating again. It wasn't something I had planned, but one evening, through mutual friends, I met a man named Andrew Collins. Andrew was also divorced. His marriage had ended after he discovered his own wife's infidelity. Because of that, he understood something about betrayal that most people don't. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't rush anything. He simply showed up consistently. Calm, honest, reliable. The same qualities I had once believed Daniel possessed. Over time, Andrew also got to know Ethan and Sophie, and to my relief, they liked him very much. Watching them laugh together in the backyard one afternoon, I realized something important. Life doesn't end after betrayal. It changes. Sometimes painfully, sometimes unexpectedly, but it keeps moving forward. As for Daniel, I occasionally hear small pieces of news about him through mutual acquaintances. He still travels for work, still lives alone. And according to a friend who works at a nightclub downtown, Daniel is sometimes seen there late on weekends with different women. When I first heard that, the information stung, but not for long. Because by then, I understood something I wish I had realized years earlier. You cannot save someone who doesn't want to change. You can only protect yourself and the people you love. Ethan and Sophie are growing up now. They're happy. They're safe. And they know that no matter what happened between their parents, they were always loved. Looking back, the stolen wallet, the lie that started everything, almost feels insignificant now. It was just the moment when the truth began to surface. The real lesson from that time in my life is something much simpler. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it cannot be rebuilt by apologies alone. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from a life that no longer respects them. Because in the end, love should never require you to ignore the truth. And the moment you finally face that truth is the moment your real life begins again.